thank you for coming this morning. And what I'd like to do today is give you a sense for what it's like, what it would be like to live underwater and the sort of sound environment that's underwater. And it turns out that seawater is a pretty poor medium for the propagation of light. And so marine mammals don't depend on light the way we do. We use light as sort of our primary cue for sensing our environment. And on the other hand, sound is a great, propagates really well in an ocean environment. And so marine mammals use sound and both produce it and listen to natural sound in sensing the environment and have apparatus to process the sound, much the way that our brains are dedicated to processing light. And so the thing I'd like you to come away with is a sense for how complex and really useful sound is underwater, and the way different species of marine mammals use that sound. Of course, this is the kind of thing that really takes a lot of people to collect the sound, to process it. And so here are my list of co-conspirators, and the top group being basically the colleagues and students here at Scripps, and then people at other institutions at National Marine Fisheries, Cascadia Research Institute, Hub SeaWorld, that I work with in these kind of research area. So the sounds you're going to hear were all recorded in the ocean environment. It's not from a captive animal in a tank. And what that means is that it has a lot of the natural environment component to it, like wave or ship noise. And it's all done, not by sticking your head over the side of the boat and listening in the air, but by having a hydrophone that's actually coupled into the water. And one of the things that's coming about in the last few years, while you're hearing marine mammal vocalizations, if you look out and try to see the animal, obviously it's submerged, you don't see anything. On the other hand, when the animal's at the surface and breathing, then it's usually not calling. So there's kind of a complementary way of sensing the presence of the animal. Either you see the breath, visually, or it's submerged and you hear it. And what this has led to in the last few years is attempts to mesh acoustic techniques in with visual techniques for sensing the animals. This will be hopefully a way that we can get more accurate estimates of how many animals are present. Here are a couple of ways that we've made recordings, either from a package that sits on the seafloor with a hydrophone buoyed up above it. That's what you see here, or a sensor that's hanging down from the sea surface with a float above it. It's not often in this kind of work, you can sit in a laboratory hunched over a computer on the ship and not see a whale, but sometimes there are close encounters. This is Shayna Wisdom from Hub's Research Institute with a close encounter in San Ignacio Lagoon, a gray whale. But the thing I like about this picture is she's kept her headphones on, even though she's touching the whale. So there are two main classes of marine mammals. Those with teeth that are principally hunters, and those with baleen that are principally filter feeders or gatherers. And the sounds from those two classes of animals are quite different. So in the Odontocetes, that is the teethed whales, there's a real emphasis on clicks that are used to range between the animal and some other object. And this is an example of a click. So it's a really rapid set of little clicks. The other components to their sound are whistles. And the whistles tend to be more either broader range sensing of the environment or communicating to others of their species. You can see the sweeping of frequency in the whistle. The Mysticetes, the baleen whales, the whales are larger, and the distance over which they're communicating or navigating are much greater. So the sounds tend to be lower frequency, and sort of tonal. So we'll get into specifics of what kind of species makes what kind of call. Now, the first thing we need is some sort of tool to be able to analyze the sounds. And, you know, we being visual, if we were a dolphin, we'd just have a picture in our head of what the structure of the sound. But what we need is a visual picture. We're visual animals. And so what I've shown here is called a spectrogram. And a spectrogram divides the sound up into frequency on the vertical axis and time in the horizontal axis. And it's a way of giving you a sense for the changing frequency content of the sound. And the intensity, the color of the plot, tells you about the intensity of the sound. So just to talk about the use, how you would use sound in the sense of a sonar. A sonar is just basically a ranging or navigation device. And so one thing you can do is if you send out a short pulse of sound, you can measure the travel time and have that be a sense for how far away an object is. So here the dolphin has sent out a pulse, it bounces off his prey, the fish, and comes back. And having measured that travel time, you can convert that into a range. And so that's the primary purpose of the clicks. The other thing you want to know is your relative velocity to some other object. How is it moving? How am I moving? Am I closing on it? And if you send out a continuous wave of sound, a long tone, if you're stationary with respect to the source, the echo that you get back is of the same frequency that you sent out. On the other hand, if you send out a tone and the object, either you or the object is moving with respect to that tone, you can see what happens is that there's a narrowing of the wavelength when you're basically moving toward each other, and there's an expanding of the wavelength as you're moving apart. And so by looking at the frequency shift, you can say the relative velocity between yourself and the object. So this is called a Doppler sonar. The same effect you hear. The classic is you're standing next to a train and the train whistle changes frequency as it goes by you. So let's look a little bit in detail at the way that Odontocetes produce sound. And they actually do it quite different than almost any other mammal. And that is that we produce sound with a set of vocal cords that's in our air passage. And the Odontocetes actually have the larynx, in their air passage, but it's not the place that they produce the clicks. They've evolved a mechanism, and it's as if near the tip of your nose, you had a way of producing clicks. So right about here, and there are a set of air sacs. It's motion of the air in those air sacs that produces the click. And then there's a structure. The forehead of the animal is really dedicated to focusing the sound. And there's a structure called the melon. And the melon is a fatty material with a graded acoustic property that produces from the click in the head of the animal a collimated beam of sound. And so this is quite a lot of investment in an evolutionary sense in the apparatus to produce the sound. This is the extreme example of a sound-producing odontocete. That's a sperm whale. And from about here all the way to the rostrum and down to about here, the entire structure of the animal is a sound projector. The sound source is here near the tip of the rostrum, but it actually propagates backward along an acoustic lens, bounces off a concave skull, and then is projected forward. And so principally, these animals essentially only make clicks. And what I'm about to play is the signature click of a single animal, and you'll hear this. Hopefully this will work out. It's 5 clicks and then a 6th. Right? Okay, so there's a single sperm whale with his what's called a coda, or sort of signature click. Now, when you get a bunch of them together, this is 30 or more animals. If you listen right here, it's a rapid click, right? There's at least one animal making a very rapid click. The rapid clicking, you can imagine what you want to do is only have one pulse in the water at a time. So if something's far away, you have to wait a long time before you send another click. But if something's close, you can go into a very rapid mode of clicking, and that's the sort of buzzing you hear at the end of that. Now, the sperm whale is the largest Odontocetes, the largest toothed whale, and now I'm stepping down to about a 10-meter animal. This is a beaked whale, Baird's beaked whale, and in this recording you'll hear a combination of both whistling and fast clicking. Here's the whistle. Here comes the buzz. So the whistle being sort of broad range imaging or communication to others, the clicking being very close in, distance measurement to some object. This is actually made off the coast of Washington, Oregon. Everybody's, marine park sort of favorite animal is the killer whale. There are a resident group of killer whales in the Juan de Fuca area, in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And as the social nature of the animal and perhaps even the intelligence of the animal goes up, there's a higher complexity to the calls. And you'll see from this both some whistles and the fast clicking, but a lot more sort of complex nature to the call. So those sort of groany sounds or creaky sounds are actually a lot of fast clicking with some whistles mixed in. This is an Arctic whale, the beluga, and in the days of the Arctic whaling, they actually called it a sea canary because of the nature of its chirping. This recording has both some pulses that are pretty low frequency, and then listen for a higher frequency, almost canary-like sound. The water droplet type sounds are these sort of pulses down low, and then this is the canary sound, this red line through here. Grampus is now a slightly smaller whale. This particular recording is from the Channel Islands region just off of California, and you can see the melon area, this elaborated part of its head. This is a recording with some probably sperm whales present also. You'll hear a lot of clicking, but there are three sounds, sort of a more whistly sound and then two sets of fast clicks. Here's another marine park favorite and also a very clearly intelligent animal, a Terciops, the bottlenose dolphin, aka flipper. And again, listen for both clicking that you see, the fast clicking as these sort of areas of where there's sort of a filled-in look to the spectrogram, and then the whistle. That was a group of animals. That recording is actually from near Miami. Now the spinner dolphin is the dolphin that's associated with equatorial tuna. And the tuna fishermen actually use it as a clue to where to set their nets. And the nets have been improved so that the dolphin can escape, but there's a process of setting the net and sort of squeezing it in, where the dolphins are still in the middle of the net. And this is a recording of spinner dolphins as they're being squeezed into a tuna net. And you can look, just from the look of the spectrogram, you see that there's something different than normal behavior going on here. Lots of sweeping, whistles. Lots of animals talking on top of each other. I would venture to say it's probably pretty antisocial behavior and other than real stressful setting. I mean, you don't see this kind of, cacophony of sound usually. There's a picture of the spinner. They're very interesting to see because they actually jump out of the water and can spin in the air and twisting. Okay, so let's make a transition now to the Mysticetes, that is the baleen whales. And here, instead of showing you the whole head, I just have a tiny section that's from the blowhole, which is sort of at the top of their head. The rostrum is this way and the tail is that way. And their sound production mechanism is a lot more like ours. It's not producing clicks up near the tip of the nose. Instead, it's an airflow down from the lungs and into the laryngeal sac or nasal passage. And being a card-carrying physicist, I need to simplify the whale into a model. And so the model has lungs, where air is coming out of the lungs. There's some sort of oscillating element, vibrating element, and it goes into the nasal passage or laryngeal sac. And we've theorized that the natural way to get a large volume of air, when you calculate the amount of air that it's required to make some of these calls, really sustained, loud calls, it's a large volume. In fact, for a blue whale, one of the primary calls that a blue whale makes takes about half of the volume of the lungs. It takes about 1,000 liters of air. And we think that the way they do that is to use the natural compression from a dive to move the air out of the lungs and then into the solid parts. The nasal passage will essentially, never, you could flood it with water, but it won't collapse, whereas the lungs will just collapse down as the animal goes to higher pressure. So you can just naturally use the dive to move the air, and then there's some element that vibrates. And then this is a resonant structure, either the little laryngeal sac or it's like one of the tubes on an organ, right? So you can get a resonance, and that helps to create the sort of sustained tone. So here is the largest animal that's ever lived on the earth, and we have quite a few of them off the coast here, not right now, but by the summertime we'll have a resident population of blue whales. And this is a recording made just off the coast here. So it's a pulse. It's a low frequency tone, but it's pulsed. Here's an aerial photograph of a blue whale. You can actually see the backbone exposed here. This guy needs to do some feeding and fatten up. A fin whale is a close relative of the blue, almost as large. This is a fin whale recording from the Bering Sea. And fin whales use a similar pattern. This call is a little bit unusual for fin whales because they tend to use just a fewer set of pulses. But here again, it's a series of pulses. Lower frequency than what I just played with the blue. I've thought that even though they're not actually making a pulse or a click and ranging off something, that the pulse nature of this may help them to get some sort of sense of range, or it's still not clear the function of a lot of these calls, but I think that navigation and sort of sensing the environment must be an important part of it. A right whale. Right whales are actually probably the most endangered species, especially in the Pacific, but also in the Atlantic. It's called a right whale because it's the right whale for a whaler to hunt. And the reason is it has a lot of oil in its body, and after death, even if you take the air out of its lungs, it'll still float. So early on, right whales were the first whale, for the whaling industry. And in the Pacific, there may be as few as 20 or so right whales left. So this is a Pacific right whale that was recorded in the Bering Sea. It's an upsweep. There's a tone. They're not real vocal animals, and it may be because they spend a lot of time at the surface, and the surface is not a very good place to make calls. But this is an example of their calls. So this is the whale that is really easiest for you to see from California, and this is a great time to do that. In fact, the aquarium has some whale watching trips, a gray whale, and this particular recording was made in San Ignacio Lagoon, where the whales go to spend the winter months. Sort of a knocking sound, maybe like a conga drum. They're not real vocal animals, but it's interesting to note that the frequencies of this call are really very well adapted to propagating in shallow water, and that's where the animal spends a lot of time, in sort of less than 100 meters of water. And if you look at the propagation curves, a few hundred hertz is really optimal. So the animal has developed a sonar that's really appropriate for the environment in which it lives. Here's everybody's favorite whale song. In fact, you can make records from this that'll turn into golden albums, at least in the 60s, in the Humpback Whale. This is made off the coast of Costa Rica. And it's a very small part of a song that goes on and on and on and on. It's about a 10-minute cycle to go through one set of the song. And you can actually break the song down into different components and see the repetition, but also see how those components evolve over time. And the thinking on this particular sound is that it's made by the males as a mating call. And it seems consistent with the fact that usually they're immobile. They're staying in one place. They're really not, and sort of hanging head down and pretty immobile as they make the call. So that's sort of appropriate for saying, it's a signaling call for females to then come and mate. But it's also a way that you could maybe assess the fitness of the male, based on the volume or the character of his song. But that's what most people think of in terms of whale song. And this is a beautiful picture that Jay Barlow gave me of the nose of a humpback with the little bumps. So the question is, are the pulses related to the heartbeats of the whale? And so there are the two classes. There are the Odontocetes, where the pulses come very rapidly. They may be 100 pulses a second, right? Now, on the Odontocetes, it's more like a 1 second, rate. And I don't know of any evidence that would say that it's related to heartbeat. But I think it may be more, my guess would be it's related to the volume of structures, that you're moving air in and out of, like the size of the laryngeal sac. Question is, can the whales label their own pulse to know when the echo that's coming back is from their own or from someone else? And I would guess that it's a lot like the way that if we were to play a recording of various people's voices, that I would easily recognize my own voice or the voice of people that I associate with. And so I think that there are just small characteristics that they can use to recognize their own signal. And the signals I showed for the sperm whale, the sort of coda that's a signature, but I think there's in most species there's a lot of variation in sort of the real character of the signal, depending on the range of the object they're trying to image or whether it's communication. So I would be pretty certain that they could recognize, they pick their own signals out of this cacophony of sound. Does temperature of the water affect the sound propagation? Certainly. And so I think that's a good point to say that there are different conditions in the summer and in the winter, in terms of the surface layer and the sound velocity of the surface layer, particularly the mixed layer and how thick that is. So, and I would guess that the whales have a pretty keen ability to sense that and know where they are in that sound velocity profile, and then tailor it to whether they want the sound to go for some distance or whether they want it to stay local. I mean, if you're a submarine captain, you certainly know that, right? And these whales have been, 40 million years as submarine captains. So the question is, how do we collect the recordings? And the answer is there really are two ways. And one way is with the apparatus that just sits passively on the seafloor, we have the technology now to leave those out, at least for baleen whales, to leave them out for a year. So a place like the Bering Sea that you don't want to be in December, we go up and we put in a package, some nice afternoon in August, and we don't go back until the weather is nice, right? Now, the other device, which has a float and a hydrophone hanging down below it, those we get from the Navy. They're called sonobuoys, and they're actually expendable. It comes in a tube, throw it over the side, it all opens up, gives you a beautiful recording, and then a few hours later it just sinks to the bottom, right? Thank you very much, Uncle Sam. And those are more where you're in the presence of whales and you could put it out, and that's very valuable because we need actually visual observations and acoustic observations that are coincident, and you don't get that with the passive recorders. Yeah.
John, thank you for a very wonderful presentation. Thank the audience for the questions.
Thank you.